Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Way of the Warrior, which is episode 1 of season 4 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win the poll for my Deep Space Nine episode reviews was The Way of the Warrior. So, The Way of the Warrior is the episode in which the Klingons come to Deep Space Nine, and tons of Klingons are everywhere, and they start harassing people, and Siska gets a bit irritated with them, so he calls in Worf to try to figure out what's going on, and Worf eventually discovers that the Klingons plan to invade Cardassia because they believe that the Founders have taken over Cardassia, but they have zero evidence for that, so Starfleet is completely against it, and Siska warns the Klingons not to do it, but they do it anyway, and this pisses off Starfleet, and they protest, and so the Klingons cut off the alliance and says that we don't have an alliance anymore, and they try to invade Cardassia Prime and kill all the civilian leaders who just took over. So Sisko teams up with Dukat to save the civilian leaders, and Sisko tests them to make sure they're not changelings, and they're not changelings, and Gowron shows up with his fleet, and Sisko tells him that, but Gowron says he doesn't care and wants to kill them anyway because Cardassia would be better off with the Klingons taking over, but Sisko refuses to do that, and the station attacks all these Klingon ships with their new weapons upgrade, and they manage to fend them off long enough for Starfleet to get there, so the Klingons decide to retreat, but said they're really pissed off now and say that they won't forget. And Worf has been exiled from the Klingon Empire for siding with the Federation, and so he doesn't know what to do. He wants to quit Starfleet and join the Mazarian Alliance, but Sisko gives him a pep talk, and Worf decides to stay into Starfleet. In fact, takes a job on Deep Space Nine, so he's now a main cast member on Deep Space Nine. So, I think this episode's overrated. When I did my top 10 most overrated episodes of the Star Trek franchise, this wasn't on that top 10 list. I think it was number 8. Because I've heard so many, I see it on a lot of top 10 best lists of Deep Space Nine. I hear so many other people say it's one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine. And, don't get me wrong, I don't hate this episode. I think it's fine. But I don't think it's anywhere near one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine. So now one of the main issues I have with it is how it turns the Klingons into enemies, and this would only last for a season and a half before the writers figured out that that was a stupid idea, and then they rightfully try to undo it. And so the whole Klingon conflict that happens throughout season 4 and the first half of season 5 seems like a kind of a blemish on the Star Trek, on Deep Space Nine, kind of out of place. So here's the thing about that. So the writers, I did some digging and some quotes, read some quotes from the writers and producers involved in Star Trek. So it was Paramount Studio that came up. I don't even know if it was Rick Berman. It might have been even above his head, or he might have been involved in it. I'm not sure. But the studio came up with the mandate that Deep Space Nine needs to have the Klingons be the main villain, and that they have to take Worf on as the main character. So it wasn't Ira Steven Behr or any of the writers' idea. It was the studio, because the studio wasn't happy with Deep Space Nine's ratings, even though by today's standards the ratings would be fucking amazing. But they had this really strange and absurd expectation that Deep Space Nine should have higher ratings than The Next Generation. I don't know what the hell gave them that idea, if that was the thinking back in the 90s, but I remember as an audience member back in the 90s when this first came out, that the cultural mindset was that Deep Space Nine is nowhere near as good as Next Generation. It clearly wasn't as popular. So I don't understand why the studios expected Deep Space Nine to have higher ratings. And Deep Space Nine's ratings were actually fairly decent. Like I heard other reviewers saying that Deep Space Nine was constantly in threat of being canceled, but all the research I've done seem to indicate that that's not at all the case, and including quotes directly from people involved in Deep Space Nine, like Ira Stephen Bear, they seem to say no, our ratings were just fine. It's just the studio had this weird expectation that the ratings should be better than Next Generation. Apparently, the ratings were even better than Voyager, which surprised me because Voyager seemed to me to be more mainstream and more popular, but apparently their ratings never got as high as Deep Space Nine's. But anyway, the studio had this really fucked up expectation that the ratings should be better than TNG, so they said, well, we'll bring in a character from TNG, and the Klingons are classic Star Trek aliens, so forget about this fucking Dominion or Cardassian, nobody gives a shit about those, focus on the Klingons. So, the writers, and I think I've read some quotes from Ronald D. Moore, specifically, we're not happy about this. They didn't think it was a good idea. They didn't like the fact that they were having Worf forced on them. They're like, he's a TNG character. We should try to do our own thing on Deep Space Nine. But they had no choice. So they had to make do. And so they came up with the idea because back in Season 3, they had an episode called The Die Is Cast where the Dominion made a trap for the Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order to go attack their homeworld, but really it was a trap and they were all destroyed. And then they had this founder who was posing as a Romulan, and you find out he's actually a changeling, and he has a little conversation with Odo and Garrick, and he tells them that the Romulans and the Cardassians aren't a threat to the Dominion anymore, and that the only real threat from the Alpha Quadrant is the Federation and the Klingon Empire. And so when they were told by the studios, well, you have to do the Klingons and make them the enemies, well, they had the idea to fold it into their existing story so it felt natural by, hey, we have that line from the Changeling back in Season 3 saying the Klingon and the Federation is the only threat. So let's make a storyline where the Dominion tries to disable the Federation and Klingon empires by having them fight amongst themselves. So, in other words, that wasn't their original idea when they made that line, but when they were forced by the studio to have the Klingons be an enemy, they went back to that. And to be fair, I think they did do a really good job of folding them into the existing storyline. Because they came up with, they had the Cardassian invasion of Cardassia, so that in order to involve it in the existing, framework that Deep Space Nine already has. So in that regard, I think they did a good job. Now, apparently, I'm not sure exactly when, but I would guess it would be sometime during Season 5 was airing. The studio finally just gave up on their ridiculous concept of trying to get Deep Space Nine to have higher ratings than Next Generation, because even though they brought in Worf and the Klingons, the ratings still continued to steadily decline. And so finally they realized that it's just not going to happen, so they just completely gave up on Deep Space Nine, then let them do their own thing. Like, you guys do whatever the fuck you want, and we'll just focus on Voyager. And so that's why they destroyed Voyager. but Deep Space Nine didn't have entire free reign in the later seasons. Like, they wanted to do an entire serialized season, but the studio still was like, no, we'll just let you have 6 episodes. And then Season 7, they're like, all right, we'll let you have 10 episodes. So there was still some reign in, but they had way more free reign than in later seasons. And so I think that's why, and I'll get to this when I get to season 5, why that there was a two-parter in season 5 that all of a sudden seemed to, I call it course correct, and make the Klingons allies again, and have the Dominion and Cardassians make an alliance, so they're the enemies of the show now, which is what they always should have fucking been. And here is my point. My point and why I don't really like this episode that much, and why I hold it against season 4 and 5 of Deep Space Nine, and I don't really like those seasons as much as everyone else because they did this storyline with the Klingons being the enemies, which I think is just a bad idea, because I think Klingons, they're trying to make them villains like they were in TOS or the TOS movies, but Klingons as they are now, had they been further developed and as they were thought of, and by now I mean 1995 or 6, whenever this episode is airing, not 2025, but at this point, the Klingons were thought of as allies, as uneasy, sort of rough, a tenuous alliance, but allies, and that was the frame in which they flourished and they worked the best. So they shouldn't have tried to fuck with that. They should have kept that the same. By making them villains, they actually made them less interesting, and plus they trying to focus the show, like suddenly change focus of Deep Space Nine from the Dominion and the Cardassians to the Klingons was a mistake. And that's what they did. Like, make no mistake about it. I hear people trying to make excuses like, oh, no. It works. It's still all about the Dominion, because you see the Klingons are only fighting with the Federation because the Dominion were making them do that with changelings. And so it really stays within the same storyline of the Dominion and Cardassians. And that is bullshit, because the actual thing is that the writers were forced to make the Klingons the main villains, and so they, being good writers, which they are, the writing staff in Deep Space Nine now was like top notch, and so they were able to finagle it so that this bullshit that they're being forced to do by the studios actually does like work within the frame of what they've already established, so they're able to still weave the Dominion and the Cardassians into it, but it's still a course correction that shouldn't have happened. It's still a complete distraction that kind of meanders. I kind of see it as the Dominion storyline, which started in the season 2 finale and went quite well through season 3, kind of coming into a halt during season 4 and the first half of season 5. Like, it creeps along a little bit, because as you have like these stories of changelings and intrigue and whatnot, but it's not what it should have been. It should have been, Dominion should have always been the main focus. Now, I mean, you still get Dominion episodes here and there throughout season 4, but mostly they're presenting it as if the Klingons are the main threat, which they shouldn't be. They always work better as an uneasy alliance. So what they did in season 5 and through season 6 and 7, by having a contingent of Klingons on the station led by Martok, and so the Klingons had a larger presence in the show, but they were there as allies. That's what they should have done in the first place. If it wasn't for the fucking studio coming in and interfering and saying make them villains, which is dumb. They don't work well as villains. They work much better as uneasy allies. So if you want to have the Klingons be a main factor in Deep Space Nine, I got no problem with that. Go ahead, but do it correctly, which is what they did eventually in season 5 and 6 and 7 by having a contingent of Klingons on board the station that Worf teams up with. Do that from the beginning. Now, as far as bringing Worf in, I don't particularly think it was necessary, but I do think it it was an addition. I do think it was a nice addition to the show. I still feel like Worf never really felt like a part of the crew. He always, for the rest of the show, felt a little bit like an add-on, but he worked fine. And he does bring a nice little dynamic to the crew, I will say. So I don't really have an issue per se with them bringing Worf in, although I don't think it was entirely necessary. I think it was definitely a very obvious studio ploy to try to get people to watch the show by saying, oh, let's bring in this next generation character that you know. Which kind of annoys me, but in actuality, because the writers are so damn good, they're able to work him into the show in a way that works and that fits. In fact, Michael Dorn will often talk about how he liked Worf's time on Deep Space Nine better. He thinks there's better episodes involving Worf, and his character developed more in Deep Space Nine than he ever did on Next Generation, which I agree with. Because let's be honest, on Next Generation, he was mainly just the gruff security guy being like, I want to fire the phasers, and constantly getting his ass kicked in order to show how badass the villain alien of the week are. But on Deep Space Nine, they actually developed his character more. So. And that's what you do when you have in the hand of such a good writing staff. So in that way, I am happy. I am thankful with the fact that Worf joined the Deep Space Nine cast, but I don't think the show needed it. But it's a fine addition, as they say. But if you want to bring Worf in, fine, but you should bring him in with a contingent of Klingons that are allies on the station in order to fight the Dominion, which is what they did eventually, but they should have done it from the beginning. If you want to have a quick storyline about the changelings infecting the Klingons and Klingons sort of fighting with the Federation because of that, you want to do that as a 3-parter that just happens for 3 episodes and then it's finished with, that's fine too. But you wasted a whole season and a half on this bullshit, which I'm sorry, the Klingons just don't work as villains. And I've said it before that this episode was fine, but it should have been standalone. That you should have just stopped here and had them by the end of the don't have them pull from the Khitomer Accords. By the end of the episode, be like, okay, we're friends again now, but blah blah blah. But although that's hard to do when you have the huge giant fight scene, but then just don't have the huge. I don't know. I don't think that huge fight scene was that. I'm not that invested. I never get that invested in it. It's funny because people who call it one of the best episodes of the show say, "Oh, it has that amazing fight scene," but it's hard for me to actually It looks cool. I won't deny that, but it's hard for me to get invested. Because they shouldn't be fighting the Klingons. They should be fighting the fucking Dominion or the Cardassians. It just feels wrong. And it's just not where my interests lie. Because it's not what the first 3 seasons of the show have been building up to. It just kind of comes out of nowhere for a ratings boost. And it's kind of obvious that that's the case. Now, the other thing I really want to talk about, because I'm covering this episode as part of the poll. So I'm taking a break because I'm covering every episode of Deep Space Nine in order, and I'm taking a break and I randomly put up 5 episodes, and the viewers voted on it, and this is the episode they chose. But I just finished season 2, so I'm skipping exactly a year ahead. I'm just skipping over it. But after I cover this episode, I'll go back to season 3 and then go in order again. But it's weird going straight from season 2 to this episode. But it is interesting because the important thing I want to talk about is I've been hearing a lot, and I mean a lot, not just from one corner of the internet or one source. I seem to hear this all over the place. People telling people who want to watch Deep Space Nine and haven't seen any of it before to skip the first 3 seasons and start here with this episode. And every time I hear someone say that, I put in a comment or whatever to argue against that, because that is some of the dumbest things I've ever heard. That, I don't know why this stupid idea is floating around the internet and I keep hearing it regurgitated. Absolutely not. Like, if you ever hear this idea, do not listen to it at all costs. Like, absolutely do not. In fact, because this is poignant for me, because I just finished watching the Jim Hadar, which is in fact the episode you should start with. If you really need to skip the first 2 seasons, if you want to start with Good Deep Space Nine, that's where you start. The Jim Hadar, the season 2 finale, not the season 4 premiere. Like, that makes absolute zero sense to start with this episode. And as I said, it's the dumbest thing ever. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a mini video now that I'm going to take this section of this video and make it its own video as well, so it stands alone for people who haven't seen Deep Space Nine before. So let me start. So if you've never seen Deep Space Nine before and you've heard this idea that you should skip over the first 3 seasons and start with season 4, the season 4 premiere, The Way of the Warrior, don't do that. Like, this idea, wherever it came from, whoever's perpetuating this, is dumb and misunderstands Deep Space Nine. So you absolutely, under no circumstance, should do that. In fact, I would recommend just going ahead and watching the show from the beginning. However, I realize that there's some people out there who really don't like the first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine, especially the first season. It is rough. It took them a while to find their footings. The characters aren't all there. They're trying to emulate Next Generation a bit more than they should. So I understand if you're off put by that and you don't want to have to sit through that and slog through it, and you want to get to the good stuff. But if that's the case, then start with the season 2 finale, the Jim Hadar, because that introduces the Dominion, who is the main villains of Deep Space Nine and sort of what the show revolves around. Season 4, the premiere of The Way of the Warrior, is all about the Klingons and the Klingons invading and having a little conflict with the Federation, but that whole conflict is instigated by the Dominion. So I don't understand why you would start with that. That's like starting halfway through the story, and also is focusing on the Klingons, who are not the main focus of Deep Space Nine. They are kind of a important factor in Deep Space Nine going forward, for sure, and introduces Worf, who will become an important character on Deep Space Nine later on. But that's not where you should start. If anything, you need to start with the season 2 finale, the Jim Hadar, because there's no reason to skip season 3, because season 3 is an amazing season. That is the season in which the show got great. I know not everyone agrees with that. Some people prefer season 4, but I think it's pretty objective that season 3 is much higher in quality than seasons 1 and 2, because they got more writers. This is when Ira Steven Behr took over as the showrunner. They got more writers from the Next Generation, like Ronald D. Moore and Renee Echevarria, and it's just, you can tell the quality of the show like upticked in season 3. And moreover, season 3 introduces a lot of important things about the Dominion, and so absolutely no way in hell should you skip it. Now, I would say don't even skip seasons 1 and 2. But, as I said, it's rough to get through. So, I'm going to recommend specific episodes for you to watch from season 1 and 2, because I understand not wanting to sit through all the crap in those first 2 seasons and all the episodes. So, hit the important episodes, though. So, Emissary, which is the premiere, introduces Deep Space Nine and Bajor and the wormhole aliens known as the Prophets and all that, so that's an important one to have, so watch that. Then the next one to watch, as much as I don't like this episode, I would say The Nagus, because it didn't, as much as I don't like the Ferengi bullshit, it will come up later in the show and introduces the Nagus, and also gets into Jake and Nog and their relationship. And then, let's see, the next one after that is, I would say, Duet. So just those 3 episodes in season 1. Or no, 4 episodes. So Duet is one of the best episodes of the entire show. And there's no way in hell you should skip over it. Plus it really gets into the backstory of the Bajorans and the Cardassians and the occupation and all that. So absolutely must watch episode. And then the next episode, the season 1 finale, In the Hands of the Prophets. So 4 episodes of season 1, because In the Hands of the Prophets introduces Vedic Wynn, who will be a very important character going forward. So absolutely must watch that. And then I would even say for season 2, there's a 3-parter that starts out season 2 called The Homecoming, The Circle, and The Siege. And it's a 3-parter all about this Bajoran Civil War, and I think that's also important viewing as well. And then throughout season 2, I would say Necessary Evil, because that gets into the backstory. It has flashbacks to when the Cardassians originally controlled the station, so that's very interesting. That's very interesting to have as well. God, what else in season 2? You want to do the Maquis, because it introduces the Maquis, so the Maquis parts 1 and 2. And then the crossover, because it introduces the Mirror Universe, and plus it's the best Mirror Universe episode, so you don't want to skip that. Then The Wire, because it really gets into Garak and his character. It's the first really great Garak episode, and he becomes the best character of the show, so you don't want to skip that. And then The Collaborator, because it kind of is when something important happens with Vedic Wynn. That's really important, and Baral and all that, so you definitely need to watch that. And then the finale, the Jem'Hadar. So it's Emissary, The Nagus, Duet, In the Hands of the Prophets, the 3-parter to open season 2, the Homecoming, The Circle, The Siege, then Necessary Evil, I think we jump straight to the Maquis, parts 1 and 2, then Crossover, The Wire, and the Jem'Hadar, and then you can go ahead and just go into season 3, and you skip over a lot of the crap except for the Nagus, but hey, you might like the Ferengi, and but you skip over most of the crap, like all the useless episodes. And no, don't bother with the Loxana Troy episode. You already know who she is. You don't need to see that bullshit. But yeah, those episodes. So watch those episodes if you feel like you must, but under no circumstances should you skip over season 3. Like, there's a couple of terrible episodes in season 3, like Meridian and what's the one, Distant Voices. If you want to skip them, fine, but there's terrible episodes in every season. Season 4, 5, 6, 7, they all have terrible episodes, so that's a normal thing. Like, it's just the majority of the episodes are good. So why the fuck would you skip season 3? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand how this is a popular thing and why people are telling you to do this. Like, please don't listen to these people. Do not start at season 4, for the love of God. As I said, like, watch those few episodes that I said of season 1 and 2, but at the very least start with the episode The Jem'Hadar in season 2 finale. Like, please, I'm begging you. Like, anyway. Okay, so that's my little mini video within the video. It's like video Inception, which I'll go out and release that later. But anyway, so yes, so I said what I said. Like, it's just, why would you start with this? Like, and it's funny because I just watched the Jem'Hadar, then I watched this episode, and I could see the Jem'Hadar being a great episode to start the show with, and this being a terrible episode. Like, why would you start the show with this episode? Like, it's like telling someone to turn on the movie and start halfway through. Like, why the fuck would you do that? Like, it makes zero sense. Anyway, now getting more into this episode specifically, yeah, as I said, it's fine. Like, it's the one. All right, another thing I had to say that really bothers me about this episode, probably the thing that bothers me the most about this episode in in specific, not thinking about like season 4 and 5 as a whole, but just this episode, the thing that bothers me most is Gowron and how he... Now, I don't know if I'd say this was entirely out of character for him, because I've heard other people say it was completely out of character, because he is kind of a slimy political dick. But I just think it's just repeating the same thing with him. It seems to come out of nowhere as well. It seems like Worf, he's like, Worf, come with me to Cardassian. And Worf is like, no. He's like, well, if you refuse me, I'm going to exile you. But what? Like, huh? Actually, I take that back. It is out of character for Gowron, because he's like all of a sudden like wanting to make war with the Federation, which is really stupid of him. Now, to be fair to the writers, from what I understand, I could be wrong, but from what I heard in the interviews, seems to me that they were original plan was to make him the changeling. Now, I don't know if they were thinking about that when they were writing this episode specifically, but I do know by the end of the season when they revealed Gowron's the changeling, that was their idea. And it wasn't until they started writing season 5, they're like, actually, no, let's not make Gowron the changeling. Let's make Martok the changeling. And by the way, Martok only appears in this episode before they reveal before he appears again in season 5 when they reveal he's the changeling. So you only know him from the one episode. Oh yeah, that guy we saw in that one episode, he's the changeling. But then of course the real Martok would become a main character and awesome. And it's so weird seeing this evil version of Martok. You like the good version of Martok better. But yeah, but the original, from what I understand, the original idea was that Gowron was the changeling, and that would actually make sense why he's acting incredibly out of character and being dumb and wanting to start all these wars and willing to make an enemy out of the Federation, which is the dumbest fucking thing ever. Now, I will say the scene at the end where Gowron relents. It's like, oh, you're right, I'm not going to let the Dominion rule the day, and Martok is like, no, we must keep fighting. That does indicate that Martok is the changeling more than Gowron, but that was not the writer's idea. Like, they didn't come up with the whole Martok being the changeling thing until season 5. But yeah, the point is Gowron's incredibly out of character, and the larger point is the whole storyline with Worf, you're going to be exiled. We already fucking did this on Next Generation. And don't tell me, oh, it's a different show. It's the same fucking franchise. It's the same goddamn character. You already did the storyline. It was it lasted several seasons, and I remember being so involved and thinking, oh my god, Worf, he's got to get his name back. He can't be in the Klingon Empire. And then he gets his name back, and a couple years later, they have this episode, and they do it again. They do the exact same fucking storyline again, and this one's a lot weaker too. It just seems for no reason. Oh, you pissed me off by not joining me in this war, so you're exiled now. Like, what the actual? Like, I realize that Gowron's a slimy politician, and nobody gives a shit about him. But why would he be able to get away with doing shit like this? It seems like there would be more pushback. Not just from Worf, but other nobles who'd be like, hey, if he can just exile someone just for pissing him off, then he's gonna come after us, so let's fucking make sure he can't get away with this bullshit. I just don't buy it. And it's just bad story writing. It's just repeating the same beat. Why do they don't even need to do this? Why do they need to have it so, oh, you're exiled now? Ugh. I guess it's part of the whole Klingons are the bad guys thing. I guess it goes hand in hand with that, but as I said, they never should have fucking did that. They absolutely never should have done that. It's just not a good story. Now, a lot of the character interactions in this episode is really, really good. There is one little thing that I noticed, I'll have to point out before I forget again, that I never noticed before. I never noticed the implications before until just now, just rewatching this episode, because there's a scene where Worf is talking to O'Brien, and he's like, Worf is, talking about best of both worlds, and you remember that time we were fighting the Borg? We were like warriors from the old day. There was nothing we couldn't do. And O'Brien's like, except keep the holodecks running correctly. Now, I always saw that as kind of a fine little snide joke, and I think that's how O'Brien intended it. We couldn't keep the replicators working, or we couldn't keep the tractor beam working, or the transporter working correctly. But I thought about it more. He didn't say replicators or transporters. He said holodeck. And it just occurred to me, I'm like, oh my god, like that's a dig off of all those fucking holodeck malfunction episodes about how the safeties malfunction and the holodeck turns into a fucking death trap all the fucking time when it shouldn't. I was like, oh my god, that's the writers kind of making fun of themselves for the fact that the holodeck constantly malfunctions. Can't believe I never spotted that one before, but that's a clever thing. But yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of good character interactions. Like, here's the one thing I'll say about Season 4, because I railed against the whole Klingons being the villains, and that does fucking piss me off, and it will, once I do get to Season 4. I still haven't covered Season 3 yet. See, I'm not like those people who are going to skip Season 3, because why? You do not skip it. But anyway, Season 4, I will say, despite having that Klingon bullshit, you can tell that the writers got better. Like, in many ways, the writing did sort of improve. And I think it would have been a better season than Season 3 if they didn't waste time with this Klingon bullshit. But because they did, and to be fair, that's not the writer's fault. It's goddamn studio that forced them to do it. Fucking studio interference, I fucking tell you, it never leads to anything good. But I can tell, like, the craft, and I can see that in this episode, like, the character interactions are really good, like, especially jumping from Season 2 to here, it's like, the writing, you can just tell, like, how much better the writing is, and how much better the writers are at their craft, and, yeah, I have some really good, character interactions, like between Kira and Dax, like the stuff going in the holosuites, and they're sort of, I love that. It was like getting their characters, making them be better friends, and like they're touching on Garrick and Odo, who became friends at the end of Season 3, and them having breakfast together, and Odo being like, oh look, this is pretend coffee or whatever. Like that's all really good stuff. And then introducing Worf and having him sort of reminisce with O'Brien, like I was just talking about, and then him like doing the holosuite thing with Dax in the training program, because Dax has her old Klingon background. Of course, they would build on this later because they would see this natural chemistry, and that's the difference, as I already said, between Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Deep Space Nine, whenever they made main characters become couples and fall in love, they would see chemistry that already existed, like Worf and Dax and Odo and not Bashir, that's a different couple, Odo and Kira. They would see this chemistry that already existed and build on it. Whereas Voyager would see chemistry that exists and completely ignore it and knock it out of the way and just shove two people together who have no chemistry and never really been together. Did that with B'Elanna and Tom. They did that with Chakotay and 709. And so that's the difference between Deep Space Nine and the Voyager. And Bashir and Ezri, existing chemistry, but that is something I will not tackle until Season 7. I still got a ways to get to that. But anyway, end of Season 7, no less. But anyway, so yeah, no, you have good chemistry, good interactions between the characters. And one of my favorite moments, I think it might be the funniest moment, or at least one of the funniest moments in the whole show, is from this episode with the Odo and Quark interactions. I love the Odo and Quark again. They sort of really got that interactions, like, really correctly. That's always been one of the best things about the first couple of seasons as well. But one of my favorite interactions is right before the Klingons are attacking. Quark is like, anyone tries to get through my bar, they're going to have to deal with me first. And he has this box, and Odo's just like, you're going to hit them with a box? He's like, no, I got to shoot them with the disruptor. And he opens it up, and there's a note from Mom saying, I'm sorry I borrowed your disruptor for parts. And Quark's like, I'll kill him! And Odo's like, with what? I fucking love that. That is just such an awesome interaction. And I will say, a lot of people talk about the root beer scene with Quark and Garrick where they're trying root beer and he's like, it's vile! Just like the Federation's all bubbly and nice. I think that's overrated. I don't think that there's much better moments with Garrick, and I don't think that's one of the best moments. It's fine, but I kind of see it as more Ira Stephen Bear trying to, poke at the Federation, which I hate whenever he does, because he just doesn't fucking understand the Federation or the principles of what it stands for, and this is more of that bullshit. And so I'm not really, I don't hate it, but I'm not like thinking it's amazing like apparently a lot of other people do. Speaking of Garrick though, like that scene where he's Cisco calls him to the room and says, oh, take my measurements, and it's just their secret way to tell him about the Klingon invasion. That was great. I love that. Again, like there's some good writing, some really great moments in this episode. I don't like, this is the start of them trying to make Dukat more of an ally though, and I don't like, that's another thing about season 4 and 5 I hate it, and that they will course correct. Again, it's all part of the course correct two-parter, which I'll get to in season 5. I call it course correction, the episode where they take all these good directions they were going in the wrong direction and course corrected so they start going in the right direction. One of them was making Dukat an ally. He's not your fucking ally. He's a fucking Hitler, Goebbels, mass murderer, fucking sociopath. He's not an ally. But anyway, so yeah, that part of it. I mean, he was kind of pompous or whatever the way Dukat is. Mark Alima always does a great job. But then you get to the Klingon attack at the end of the episode, and that's here's what I don't understand. Here's what gets me about the Klingon attack. So they attack the station, and they get fractions of the shields down, and so they beam Klingons aboard so they can attack. So there's all these fight scenes with the Klingon attacking people on ops, and the Klingons attacking people on the promenade. You get random stunt people, or the stunt coordinator always like dies. He's died on screen so many times and stuff like that. But here's my question. If the Klingons are attacking the station and they get the shield, they punch through the shields and they get the shields to be down, why don't they just shoot at it and destroy the station? Why beam Klingons aboard? Now, to be fair, I came up with the answer to this with the counterbalances, and this could make sense, is that maybe the station is more valuable to them intact, and that they'd rather commandeer the station than destroy it, because then they can use it. So, okay, I get that. But still, you're in the heat of battle. You still might want to maybe not destroy it entirely, but you can still like do fucking damage, like shoot torpedoes at it and have it like severely like in pieces and destroyed, but still to the point where it's still salvageable, like you could still repair it. But in the meantime, it would be, completely damage and then take over the station when you're in a stronger position. No, I'm just saying, like, it seems like this was done just so they could have Klingons fighting on the station. And the other thing is, they had that fight scene with Garrick and Dukat fighting each other right outside and of course the Starfleet red shirts die immediately. or they even die before we even see the battle start. But on screen, that is. But the thing is, like, we see Garrick and Dukat like fighting Klingons right outside this door that the council members are in. Why don't the Klingons just beam directly behind the door? Like, is it the shields working, like, in that one room, but not right outside the room? Is that what the deal is? Like, I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, these are all minor nitpicks. But, yeah, I mean, it's a fun episode. As I said, I do enjoy it. There's great character interactions with it. I like that they introduce Worf. Pisses me off every time I see Gowron like say, "Oh, we're gonna fight the Federation now," because they never should have fucking done that. But still, a decent episode. So I'd now like to thank all my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. Very thankful for everyone's support, and I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse and Tarius and Jordan Johnson. Thank you so much for your very strong support. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Lemiglacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Way of the Warrior, more like Way of the Boyer." This is like Boyer. I don't know if I said that correctly, like it's a boar. Anyway, this is a great episode. I like the introduction of Martok, even though I think this is a fake Martok. I do think it's weird how he has a son, but then they never mention him again. Anyway, yeah, this is a good intro to Worf, and it's exciting because we know that Season 4 is almost Season 6, and in Season 6 we meet Vic Fontaine. Can't wait, Pally. Yeah, you got a little obsession with that terrible character. But anyway, I forgot to mention Drex, Martok's son, who will disappear after this episode. He goes the way of Krax, who is the Grand Nagus' son in only the episode The Grand Nagus, and he disappears, never heard of again. My theory is that someone got a hold of some Kremen technology. Don't ask me how it got from the Delta Quadrant to the Alpha Quadrant, but somehow they and maybe it was like a temporal incursion that the Kremen traveled to the future and then sent it back in the past. But however it happened, somebody got their hands on Kremen technology, and they decided to shoot Drex with it to erase him from time. So then they erased him from time, so he no longer existed. That's my theory. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, "When I first saw this episode, I found myself frustrated. Yes, I didn't mind Worf joining the DS9 crew. I was a bit worried whether or not attention would be taken away from any of the other characters. That turned out not to be an issue, though I will admit I had an issue with Worf-centered episodes in DS9 until mid-season 5. But the decision to make the Klingons the enemy again said to me, oh no, this is taken away from what the show was about. I mean, the big baddies were either the Cardassians or the Dominion, and why throw in the Klingons? Thankfully, a course correction mid-season 5 had it make sense, but there was a future version in the following weeks, The Visitor, that would have not reassured me in the short term. Then there was Gowron's stupidity. I could see him being bold, but not this ridiculously stupid. While the stupidity made me with no problem by decisions he did, especially the handling of Martok in the future. And yes, There were episodes where he ignored Worf in Redemption Part 2 as to what he was trying to bring up early in that episode, and I guess later how we would handle Kahless. I saw his ambition getting ahead of him. I mean, especially what was revealed in Unification Part 1. But I really felt, with respect to the writing, that Gowron doing all these bold things seemed forced. I could more readily easily buy the Romulans at this point doing the blood checks and being distrustful of the Cardassians instead of the Klingons. But of course, there were two reasons they did this, and it had to deal with ratings more than anything. Worf has to come to Deep Space Nine for some reason, and yeah, the Klingons, I guess, are more popular foes than the Romulan. Then they did something that totally ticked me off. They totally erased the whole redemption arc for Worf from TNG. How dare they? Once they did that, I groaned, even with effective acting from O'Reilly as Gowron gives the line, "I do not forgive nor forget," to Worf, and it brings up a whole new conflict between those two that in the long run ended up being effectively good in DS9 lore. At this point, no. I was really ticked off at the end of the episode and was dreading this may be the last season of Deep Space Nine, which after a mostly good season 3, I was furious. Thankfully, writing, producing, acting was truly top notch. When I see many of their saying that this is the first episode to watch DS9, or this is the episode when it really got good, I would call it instead a great risk that could have seriously jumped the targ. I give it 7 cases of root beer out of 10. Root beer at first may seem insidious, but really, you really get to like it. So yeah, a lot of things there. Of course, I totally agree with you about making the Klingons the enemy was a huge mistake, that Gowron was acting really stupid in this episode, the way he was like totally trying to get it, go against the Federation and attack the Cardassians. Yeah, and it was a total ratings grab. That's absolutely why this happened. It's just studio says we want more money and Klingons are popular, so do them. Anyway, yeah, and it pisses me off too. I was never really worried though that the show would get canceled. That thought never crossed my mind, and apparently that was not a risk. But yeah, you bring up The Visitor next week, or next week's episode, the episode aired after this, and how they had this future where the Klingons took over Deep Space Nine. That's to me still a blemish. Like, there's a blemish on the show. Like, I don't know if I mentioned, but Worf, apparently they had the scripts for the first set of episodes already written before they knew they were going to have to include Worf. So they had to rewrite the scripts to put Worf in. And the other thing is that they originally had a different two-parter plan to start out the season, where that dealt with the Changeling threat, because that's how season 3 ended. And I think pretty much that episode became the two-parter later in the season, the Paradise Lost and what's it called, Homefront. I don't know if those episodes would have been the same or totally different if it was the season premiere. I don't know if they just bumped them to later in the season or if they just totally changed it. I feel like they could have done more of a Changeling threat if it was opening the season. Now, they had that scene at the start of the episode where they're all chasing the Changeling, and that's kind of just there to fake you out when you know it's Odo. And by the way, in that scene, Kira calls someone and says, "Kira to O'Brien, we found the Changeling and it's here. Be careful, the Changer is insidious." Blah blah blah. But if they're doing like a practice run, then he already knows all that. So I don't know why she has to say it. It's just they're trying to fake you out and make you think it'll change. But no, it's just target practice, and it's just Odo, and then the episode's going to have nothing to do with the Changeling. It's just be about the Klingons for some goddamn reason. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, let me be clear. I do like this episode, but this episode should never be in a top 10 best episodes of DS9 or even the franchise, as some people do. There are too many issues that I have with this episode, with number one being making the Klingons an enemy, which was a huge mistake. Huge misdirection. Honestly, it really hurt the show for a while. Thank God that this was resolved in season 5, but this shouldn't have happened at all. It's funny that I am all on board for consequences and serialized storytelling, but this should have been a reset button and should have been resolved at the end of the episode. Also, Worf joining DS9 I do like, but I wouldn't say that he made the show get better. For I think season 3 of DS9, the show had already found its footing, but I do like Worf's inclusion overall. I do love the battle sequences in the episode, and I do love the action and the politics and the interactions with the Klingons, and our characters were really good and strong, but I had to admit that the famous scene between Garak and Quark talking about root beer was nothing special to me, and nowhere near as good as the other Garak moments in the show. So, like I said, I do really like this episode. This is in my top 50 episodes, but not top 10 or even top 25. So my rating is an 8 out of 10. I think when I did my top 50 Deep Space Nine, that this episode did make it. I'm not so sure. I think it pretty much had all 8 rated episodes. But I don't know. Like, I don't think of this as a top 50, but I guess it would probably make my top 50, but not top 40. But we're always on the same page, Ricky. Almost always. Sometimes we disagree, very rare occasion. But this, we're could not be more in sync about how this is a huge misdirection, and how, I wish that this episode was more episodic. I wish that they hit the reset button after this episode. Oh no, the Klingons were upset. But now things are going to go back to normal and their allies again, and we'll move on. And the thing is I think this was from Norman's comment, something about how the Klingons are a more popular foe, but I would argue with that they're not actually in the Next Generation Deep Space Nine timeline. They're a more popular ally, uneasy ally for sure, but they're not seen as enemy, and it's just I cannot hammer home how big of a mistake that it was making them the enemy. So, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, there were 29 episodes of Deep Space Nine. From this episode to the last, nor the battle to the strong. How many episodes focus on the Federation Klingon War? There are 7, and that includes episodes when Worf and Dax got together, which I don't count for the episodes that have 1 or 2 lines in it. So I don't agree with people getting so upset about the Federation Klingon War in the episode The Die is Cast. The changeling who played Mr. Romulan said that the races we are now worried about are humans and Klingons. I think people just ignore this line. So having only 7 episodes on this war doesn't matter. Have a wild guess on the episodes that focus on the Dominion between the same time frame. I will tell you at the end with my score. This was a brilliant episode, and yes, Mr. Romulan said to Odo that the Federation and Klingons are the only ones who worry us now. I was so happy that the Klingons were coming to Deep Space Nine, so the war didn't bother me, because the show told us this may happen. Gowron not allowing Worf to play with Klingons, different show, don't care. I wonder where was Deep Space Nine's traitor. Maybe he was busy talking to that TNG traitor. Martok's son is never mentioned again. Easy answer. He died during the battle, and we all know Klingons don't care about people dying, so we never see Martok crying for his dead son. So my rating is 10. There are 7 episodes about the Dominion, Hippocratic Oath, Starship Down, Homefront, Paradise Lost, To the Death, Broken Link, The Ship. I rest my case out of 10. Adjusted comment, I stand by my rating on Preemptive Strike being the 5th worst episode on TNG. Well, Steven, I really appreciate all the support you give my channel. And you've been one of my most loyal Patreon supporters and commenting a lot. And so you help me out a lot. And I appreciate it even more because I realize that we disagree on a lot. This, not all the time. We have times of agreement, but sometimes we really disagree. And like Preemptive Strike, which you brought up, which to me, that was number 8, and the 8th best episode of all of Next Generation. You have it as the 5th worst episode. So that's like one of the areas where we're like, couldn't be further apart. And this is another one. What you're saying about Way of the Warrior. So, you rest your case with the fact that there are 7 Klingon episodes where the Klingons are the enemies until season 5 when they become friends again, and that there's also 7 episodes about the Dominion. Well, so let me make my case. My case is the number of episodes where the Klingons are the enemy should be 1! And 7 is 6 too many. Because it's a distraction. And the number of episodes that focus on Dominion between here and mid-season 5 should be 14, not 7. There should be more of a focus on it. And as for people forgetting and not realizing that Mr. Romulan back in the episode The Die Is Cast said that there's, the only thing to worry about is, they said the Federation, not humans, but same thing. They said the only thing they have to worry about is the Federation and the Klingons. Here's the thing. Yes, he did say that, and I was always aware of it, even when I first saw this episode. In fact, when I saw this episode, I was like, oh, yeah, so they're probably playing off the thing that the Romulan guy said in the Die Is Cast, but that still, didn't change the fact that I could very obviously see that this was the studio forcing them to say, hey, let's make the Klingons. Like, even back then, I could tell. Even I didn't know this for a fact. I do now because I read lots of interviews. And Ronald D. Moore, as I said, and not Brennan Bragg, but who else is Ira Stephen Bear? That's what I'm thinking. Ronald D. Moore, Ira Stephen Bear, and a couple of the other writers didn't want this. They didn't want it. And I think there's a reason why. Now, because they're good writers, they were able to work them in. And so they used that line that the Romulans say as an excuse to justify what the studio was forcing on them. But that was never their original intention. Quite frankly, this was always very obvious to me. Even when I was 15 or whatever, when I first saw this episode, it's obvious to me that this felt out of place, even considering that line, which I never forgot, which I was always aware of in the back of my mind, but I could always tell they were just using that line as an excuse to justify what the studio is forcing them to do. So the thing is the Romulans said the only thing that's a threat from us from now on is the Federation of Klingons. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to try to start a war between the Federation and the Klingons. It could mean, I thought it meant when I first saw the episode that they were going to try to attack the Federation and Klingons or weaken them in other ways. And so what it means is they're going to make the Klingons attack Cardassia, and they somehow predicted that would drive a wedge between Starfleet and the Klingons, and I don't know. It's weak, if you ask me, but let's say it's not. Let's say that you can totally justify that this is something the Dominion would do. As a story, looking at it from a storytelling perspective, it loses focus. It feels to me, and to a lot of other people who agree with me here, I know you don't, but to me, it feels like in season 4 and 5, the show lost its focus. That it's all of a sudden focusing on the Klingons being enemies, and it's not a part of the Dominion arc. It's only very loosely, the Dominion has changelings to try to fuck with people. It still doesn't justify it. And you didn't list the 7 episodes of the Klingons, and I was too lazy to look it up myself. But you mentioned that you're not counting the episodes that just have 1 or 2 lines about the Klingons being enemy. I would count them, because, like, The Visitor, for example, when they mention, there's a future where the Klingons take over, that one line, that one scene kind of ruined the episode for me a bit, because that's not what the show should. This shouldn't be the Klingons in the future taking over the station. It should be the fucking Cardassians or the Dominion. Like, this doesn't. And they act like, the Dominion, they hadn't even heard of them in 20 years. Like, they just went away. Like, what the fuck? What the actual? In other episodes that just casually mention the Klingons as enemies, absolutely not. No, they shouldn't. This is a distraction. I don't care if it's just a one line of dialogue, because it is a looming theme that is over the show, even when the entire episode isn't about it. That is a distraction. That is pushing the show in the wrong direction. So I never forgot about what the Romulans said. It still doesn't justify making the Klingons the main focus. And here's the thing, I don't care if there was an equal amount of Klingon episodes and Dominion episodes, because there shouldn't have been. There should have been way more focusing on the Dominion. Now, if you want to have the Klingons be an ally working with the Federation to fight the Dominion, like they did rightfully do in second half of season 5 and 6 and 7, then sure, I'm all for it. Go right ahead, have your sort of Kahless bullshit, have like the Worf go off on the Klingon ship and fight the Jem'Hadar. No problem with that, but having a whole episode with the Klingon lawyer, and I'll get to that one once I actually start covering season 4. I hate that episode, mainly because it's a Klingon. And the Nor, the Battle for the Strong, I hate that episode too, because there's Klingons going around killing Starfleet officers and fighting a war, and they're like, oh my god, it's the Klingons. This should be the Jem'Hadar, god damn it! They never should have done this. The Klingons do not work as an enemy anymore. Like back in the original series they do, but they're much better as uneasy allies. So why the fuck would you change a working formula and change the entire focus from Deep Space Nine, which is supposed to be about the fucking Dominion and the Cardassians? Grr, I'm sorry. I feel so passionate about this. Anyway. We'll have to agree to disagree on this one, Stephen. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, I have an unpopular opinion about this episode. I never liked it. To give the Klingons such a prominent role in Deep Space Nine and make them the enemy again feels like a strong retcon to me. I think the ensemble was interesting enough. There was no need to bring Worf to the station, in my opinion. I can understand that the producers tried something new to improve the ratings, but I would have liked to see something different that doesn't involve the Klingons. 3 things bother me in the cold open. With all the technology available, there should be a more efficient way to scan for the changelings than handled by handheld phasers. Siska's outfits are more than ugly, and why can't Dax inform him right away what happened instead of saying, you better see this for yourself? If the Klingons wanted to attack Cardassia together with the Federation, there's little reason for them to be so mysterious about the target other than the build-up suspense for the audience. If a way, without wasting time in orbit of DS9, I liked the way Worf's internal conflict was portrayed. And Mark Alimo was amazing as usual. Jadzia was on spring break again because of the multiple exploding consoles in the episode. I wonder, are more crew members of Starfleet grilled by consoles or crippling by unusually stored barrels? Next time on DS9, Worf beats up Rom because his prune juice wasn't chilled enough, and like the last time he assaulted somebody on DS9, it remains completely unpunished. My rating is a 5 out of 10. And don't forget about the exploding rocks. People always talk about how rocks kill people and explode from the console. What's his face? Michael Okuda had an excuse for that. He was saying there was like some material that got superheated, and that's what caused it to, form these things that look like rocks. But anyway, like, why do they keep rocks in the ceiling? Yeah, so I'm definitely more in line with you on this one. Yeah, so the thing is that, it didn't need this. And you say it's an unpopular opinion, but it's not an unpopular opinion here on Enchantment of Eternity. It's a popular opinion. Well, at least it's what I really think. And the thing is that I feel like whenever producers do shit like this, it does actively interfere with the quality of the show, because it is obvious. It's not just me. It's a lot of people. I'm pretty sure my sister agrees with me on this one too. It's obvious to a lot of people when they first saw this, without even hearing about it, that this was a decision that the studio made the show do, because it feels that way. It's freaking obvious because it feels out of place, especially having Worf come on. I mean, that's obvious to anyone. That it's them saying, "Oh, I want, let's make the ratings higher. We're throwing in a TNG character." Yeah, I don't know. I hear a lot of people say that they feel like Worf, if any characters from TNG is going to join DS9, that Worf made the most sense. For some reason, I always wanted to see Data on Deep Space Nine. Now, to be fair, he's more of a technobabble person, which doesn't really go along with Deep Space Nine. But still, I think it would be more interesting to have Data on it than Worf. But that's just my humble opinion. They do, as I say, make Worf work, and his character is explored way more in Deep Space Nine than it ever was on TNG. But in that regard, it kind of feels a little bit like a different character, honestly. But, that I'm able to chalk up to just growth. But, like character growth. It's not an obvious retcon change of character like Nog is, for example. But anyway, or Rom. But, yeah, but Antari is saying it feels like a string of retcons. Or strong retcons, sorry, which 100%. Because it is. It is 100% a strong retcon. It doesn't matter what the founder who's impersonating the Romulans said. This still is a change of focus for the show that just distracts. But anyway. Yeah, so next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, "I know your feelings on this episode and the Klingon War, but I love this episode. It's one of my favorites. I get the criticism about the Klingon War taking over from the Dominion story, and I don't begrudge that point, or that could have been the stopping point for the Klingon War, but I like everything about this episode. I do like how they tie the Klingon aggression to the Founders and the political upheaval on Cardassia. The Garrick scenes are all solid gold, especially when he's measuring Cisco for a new suit. The ship's battle at the end was epic, the first of several great fleet battles of the show. Plus, I think I'm correct, the battle was still done with all with models, no CGI ships, which is an amazing feat. What I just heard was that they bought a whole bunch of like toys of Klingon ships that were like made by, or models made by, companies that's commercially available. They just bought a whole bunch of them and used them. I think they just filmed them in such a way where you couldn't tell, like they didn't need like detailed expensive models. They just had, since there were like so many of them and just flying around and not focusing on them, like the main ones you could see clearly were obviously models built by the production staff, but all the tiny ones that are just flying around were actually just toys, which is really interesting. But yeah, no, so I mean, I do like the battle sequence, but to me this is kind of, it's fine. As I said, like the whole beaming aboard the station thing kind of seems a bit, contrived to me, but it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, as I said, I just can't get into this battle because the Klingons shouldn't be the enemies, and I just can't get over that. And as I said, I'll be okay with it if it was just this one episode, but because they're leading into a greater conflict and trying to shoehorn the Klingons into being the main adversaries, which they never should have done, it's hard for me to really get into this battle, to be honest. And I mean, if you want to love this episode, you go right ahead. But for me, I will always see this as an overrated episode. But that I don't hate it though, as I'll say, because I do agree with you about the strong character moments in the show. I forgot to talk about the fact that this is the first episode where we see Sisko with a bald head. That's very important. It was his important look going forward. And, as far as Michael Dorn coming on the show, apparently Nana Visitor talked about how she was worried that Worf would kind of replace her and that she would become less important. And I think that was a legitimate concern. But I think maybe a little bit in season 4 in particular that was kind of the case. But overall, and I did notice in this episode in particular that they were making a point to show Kira and Sisko working together and show their close-knit relationship. So I think they were trying to make it clear, like, no, we're not going to push you aside for Worf. I mean, for a while, they were treating it like Worf was Sisko's first officer as far as the Defiant went, and that Kira was the first officer as far as Deep Space Nine went. In fact, there was even a time where Sisko was missing, and Kira's like, I'm in command here, well, I'm going to do this, and Worf's like, well, you may command the station, but I command the Defiant, and I want to do that. And there was like a conflict with chain of command. I kind of didn't like that, because Kira should be the first officer, full stop. And now in later seasons, when we get into 6 and 7 and late 5, they make it clear that Kira's the first officer, period. Like sometimes when they're on the Defiant, she takes over. And I heard some people complaining, though, why the fuck is she taking over command of the Defiant? She's just a Bajoran officer. This is a Starfleet ship. But I don't care, because she should be the goddamn first officer of the show. So I'm glad they did that. But that is just me. Kind of off topic, too. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for The Way of the Warrior out of 10 is going to be an 8. Extremely good. As I said, an 8 is still a good rating. It's not like I think this episode sucks. I think it's pretty good standalone. I think it sucks that they kept the Klingons as an enemy. I think Gowron's acting kind of dumb in this episode and out of character, and the whole thing with that's the one thing I even forgot to fight back against in Stephen Kennedy's comment about who doesn't care about Gowron or Worf discombination because that's another show. Who cares if it's another show? That makes zero difference. It's the same freaking universe and it's the same goddamn characters, and they already did this. I'm sorry. They already did this for Worf. Like, you're doing the same goddamn thing over again. The fact that it's another show makes zero difference. But anyway, sorry. So yeah, I mean that bothered me a bit, and the fact that Ducat, they're kind of making him a bit of a friend, that bothers me. But again, that's something they'll keep up for season 4 and 5, which is no, don't. But no, so there was a lot of strong character moments. I think they did a good job introducing Worf in, and to be fair to them, as much as I didn't want the Klingons to become enemies, the writers didn't want them to do this either, but they were forced to. And they did a good job with it. Like, they did a good job integrating it into, into the existing lore. It's just a shame that the studio forced them to do it. So, decent episode, fun watch, some good character moments. The funny thing about Quark and his disruptor, I'll kill him with what? And so, great character moments. It was, I wasn't a huge, like, overly excited about the battle scenes, but they were good. They were decent. It's a good, decent show. So yeah, I think maybe I'm being a little bit generous by giving an 8. Maybe I should give it a 7, but no, I'm going to stick with an 8. 8 out of 10 for The Way of the Warrior. There's good character moments in it. Anyway, so that is it for my review of The Way of the Warrior. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to check out my channel, subscribe, leave a like, comment. All that stuff really helps me in the algorithm. And if you really want to support the channel, you could consider supporting me on Patreon. There's be a link in the description below. I have lots of tiers, different rewards, such as the Patreon-only series, where I revisit reviews that I've already done, if you are so inclined to do so. So let's see what's coming up. Next on the channel, I gotta finish these poll winners. So next Thursday, or this Thursday, will be the Voyager poll winner, Course Oblivion, my review for that. Saturday will be my review for the Enterprise poll winner, Acquisition. And Monday, I will be doing a non-Star Trek video, not very common these days, but I'll be doing the top 10 winners of my top 10 shows of the year. So I'm going to take all the shows that I put at number 1 for my top 10 show of the year and rank them in order of my favorites. And then on Tuesday, I'll be doing a patron requested video ranking the Star Trek series finales. I'll rank the series finales of each of the, not all of the Star Trek series, because I'm not doing the original series because they didn't have a finale. They just had an episode before they were canceled. And I'm not doing Prodigy because who knows if that's actually done. And it kind of didn't have a finale even if it was done. But anyway, so yeah, that will be on Tuesday. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.